Now I'd like to introduce the next speaker to you, which is Sebastian Grömminger. He is molecular biologist and expert in the field of molecular genetic in vitro diagnostics. And at the Jona Institute, he supports clients with the certification and the development and maintenance of QM systems according to ISO 13485, as well as in the implementation of the standards EN 62304 and ISO 14971. And today he will talk about the qualification and classification of IVD software under IVDR. Thank you very much for being here, and the stage is yours.
So thank you very much for this kind introduction, and yeah, thank you for inviting me, for giving me the chance to talk about IVD software here in this audience. So my topic for today is the qualification and classification of IVD software under IVDR. So I try to not repeat what Michael said. I'd rather like to dive a bit more into details of classification with the focus on IVD software or software associated with IVDs. So let us start quickly. So that was just what was already said to me personally. So just a few numbers which are not that much relevant. So let's go into the details. You all know that since the IVDD that was released put into force in 1998, the world has changed very much. There is, for instance, genetic diagnostics. There is prevention. There is preventive diagnostics. There's therapy has changed. We have companion diagnostics as a new buzzword. There is personalized medicine that is associated with genetic diseases and respective patient management, individual treatment of patients, and this all is very much associated with bioinformatic algorithms that is very much linked to software. So there is no bioinformatics which doesn't need software with an in vitro diagnostic purpose. So with that change of the scope of the IVDR, which is regarding those new features and new state of the art, so to say, there was a need to change the definition of an in vitro diagnostic medical device, which is now stated as displayed here in the IVDR. So every in vitro diagnostic medical device is itself a medical device, which is, in contrast to classical medical device, not applied directly at the body of the patient or in the body of the patient. It is outside of the body, therefore it's in vitro, and it can be a reagent product, calibrator, so on and so forth. Now you see they added here in red the tiny word software, which is having so much impact right now. So it can be any of these products, including software or a system, whether used alone or in combination, intended by the manufacturer to be used for in vitro for the examination of specimen. So here, this is very important. It is intended by the manufacturer. That was just what Sabine Ose pointed out, that it must be claimed in the intended use. That is the key word here. As far as it's intended by the manufacturer, this is the hint that it is an in vitro diagnostic device if it's not intended by the manufacturer to be used in an in vitro diagnostic procedure. It doesn't necessarily need to be an IVD. So there can be generic products, including software, or non-software products, like any general product that is used in the process can be for any laboratory purpose, but not particularly for IVD. So this is the crucial word here. So to be used in vitro for the examination of specimen, including blood and tissue donations derived from the human body, solely or principally for the purpose of providing information on one or more of the following. So here you see we have in black the definitions that were already present in the IVD directive, and now in red the added terms to fulfill the new scope of the IVDR. So we have concerning the medical purpose of providing information about the physiological or pathological process or state. So adds the word process, and concerning congenital, physical or mental impairments, concerning the predisposition of a medical condition or disease, which is, so to say, the forecast. And as well, we have to predict treatment response or reactions, which is the companion diagnostic claim, and to define or monitoring therapeutic measures. So these are the major changes on the definition. And to make it easier, I'd like to say the following. So I interpret it as such that IVDs are medical devices, so they are a subgroup of the classical medical devices, which gain medical information that is obtained from human specimen. And this is particularly true for software as well. What about the relevance? So as I'd like to find out when is it relevant for you. So therefore, I'd like to show you a few use scenarios that involve software. So the question arises, which IVD use scenarios do involve software? The classical situation is that IVDs are provided by the manufacturers to laboratories. So the manufacturer CE marks the product, produces the product, and provides it to the manufacturer, to the laboratory. And then the patient comes in, gets consulted by a physician, and the physician sends maybe a blood sample to the laboratory. And the laboratory is examining the blood sample and provides a result report to the physician, and the physician is consulting or treating the patient. So that would be a classical scenario. And it could be, software could be part of the device itself, or it could be a software device. Software could be involved in the report generation, or it could even be involved in the interpretation of the results. Here it is dependent on whether this is, so to say, part of the device itself that is coming from the manufacturer, or whether this is a software that was created or developed by the laboratory itself. Then it would be lab developed test. So then the next scenario would be a point of care testing device. So we have a device produced from a manufacturer and it's provided directly to the healthcare professionals. And those healthcare professionals are using these devices to directly diagnose patients in order to treat or give them recommendations. That would be the point of care testing scenario, which involves embedded software, certainly here in a reading device, for instance. Could be as well a smartphone involved here as a driving or influencing software. And a hospital information system can have medical functions, diagnostic functions, algorithms that are falling under the definition of an IVD with that new definition. Then we have devices for self-testing, where the manufacturer produces a CE marked IVD that is directly sent out into a home environment to the patient who is doing a self-test using a device, for instance here, a reading device with a lateral flow test, and directly receives the result and knows from the instructions we use how to use it and what to do to treat the disease. And this is involving as well software here in the device. And let us look here a bit more into details how this could be the case for components. So if you look at particularly at such a system, you have a lateral flow assay that may have a chip on it that provides information that is sent over via RFID to a smartphone, and the smartphone, so to say, can detect whether the signal is positive or negative or inconclusive, or it can be a reading device that is sending the information to the smartphone. And in both cases, certainly the vast majority of products will have a connection to a cloud-based server system, which runs the complex and powerful calculations on the server system and sends back the information to the smartphone. So we have several parts which involve software and are part of the software system. So this is particularly to be regarded under the IVDR to describe the full software system and not just a part. For instance, most of us will certainly concentrate on the reading device because that provides the information. However, as the smartphone is a user interface and the software on the server is calculating the relevant information to provide a result to the patient, this needs to be regarded as well. So in most cases, the self-testing devices involve software components, which is particularly true for standalone software with a medical purpose. How do we come to a qualification? So the question arises, in which cases is software an IVD software under IVDR? And there we're lucky that we have a guidance. In this case, the Medical Device Coordination Group did their job already last year, where they set up a guidance on qualification classification of software under both regulations. So it helps us to qualify whether it is a medical device software, and therefore this is the new term that was defined within this guidance, and this is the definition of it. So a medical device software is a software that is intended to be used alone or in combination for a purpose as specified in the definition of a medical device in the MDR or IVDR. So to me that is not relevant because the IVDR just refers to the MDR with regard to the medical device definition. So second half of the sentence is relevant. So it is regardless of whether the software is independent or driving or influencing the use of a device. So let us look into the details of that guidance document. So it raises two questions. The first question is it a medical device software, yes or no, which falls under the medical device regulations. So the first question they asked, is the product a software? And therefore we need a definition of software, and software is defined as a set of instructions that process input data and creates output data. It's a pretty easy definition. It's certainly true for the vast majority of software products that you have in mind. So the second question that is asked, so if we can say yes, it is a software, then we ask the question, is the product an accessory or driving or influencing the use of another device, which doesn't necessarily need to be a hardware device. So here's the closing bracket missing. So if it is true, it is an accessory or driving or influencing the use of another device, then it is already covered by the medical device regulations. And in this case, it's not a medical device software. It is then part of the device driven or influenced. So the classification is then dependent on the product which it is driving or influencing. Dependent on whether this is the only medical purpose. So if it's only driving or influencing the use of another medical device, this is true. However, be careful if the software does something additionally, like interpreting a result, then this would be a critical part which can upclassify the software. So if that's not the case, it's not driving or influencing the use of a hardware or other software device. The question is, does the software perform actions beyond basic functionalities? So here they mention clearly storage, archival, communication, or simple search or lossless compression is such a basic functionality which doesn't make the software a in vitro diagnostic product. So with this guidance, you have some arguments to get out of the IVDR for software that, for instance, just communicate the result from a reader device to in a PDF format, for instance, to a computer. Then it's just a communication. And if we could say yes, it does perform functionalities beyond that, so more than that, the next question is whether the action that the software takes is for the benefit of individual patients. Like, does it provide a diagnosis? Does it provide a risk score? And if this is the case, we are under the last question, and there we just ask ourselves, is the intended use of the device covered by the medical device or IVD definition, respectively? If the product falls under the definition that I've shown to you under IVDR, then yes, this is the case, and it's under the regulations. So now coming to the crucial question, whether it is an IVD software or a medical device software. There is just a 3-step protocol which this guidance answers. In the first question, they ask, does the medical device provide information within the scope of the IVD definition? So if it falls under the IVD definition, then it certainly does. And then the second question is, does the medical device provide information based on IVD data sources only? So in the text it says IVD medical devices only, but this is to me a very weak definition, because there are a lot of IVD or let's say general laboratory products out there in laboratories which are claimed for research use only or general laboratory use instruments which are providing IVD data. So therefore we need to be careful with that definition. If it's coming from IVD data sources only, then it must clearly fall under the IVDR. However, if you take into account additional data from medical devices, then it is a more difficult question. Then we need to see what is more substantially. So is the intended purpose substantially driven by IVD data sources? And if that is the case, yes, it falls under IVDR. But if you see that the crucial information is coming from a classical medical device under MDR, then it would fall over to the medical device regulation. So now we know which software product is to be regarded under IVDR and which one's not. But for those who are qualified under IVDR, the question is, how are they classified? And here we are in Article 47, the classification of devices, and it's clear it falls under class A, B, C, and D, taking into account the intended purpose and the inherent risks. And this is performed according to Annex 8, which we've seen from Michael already, and it's falling under those 4 classes. And there the GHTF gives us good arguments on a very simple basis, which products fall under which class, based on the inherent risks. So class A products have a low individual risk and a low public health risk. So these devices cannot provide results for patients and therefore do not have a high risk. In case of products that fall under class B, they should have a moderate individual risk and or a low public health risk. So the conclusion is there should be no life-threatening risk occurring in the case of a wrong result of such products, but those products can provide a result. And class C are those which are falling into a high individual risk, which can be life-threatening in the case of a wrong result, but only for one single individual. And products fall under class D if there's if there are multiple individuals under life-threatening conditions, if the in the case of a wrong result, and this is the high public health risk criterion, so to say. And the implementation rules do help us in the case of software now, because they state in the implementation rules that software which drives a device or influences the use of the device shall fall within the same class of the device. That is what was referred to in the guidance already, that in such cases where a software drives or influences the device, it falls into the same class dependent on the class of the other device. However, this is helpful here if the software is intended of any other independent of any other device, it shall be classified in its own right. So it's classified independently. And the additional implementation rules are pretty critical. That's 1.8 and 1.9. In the case of multiple intended users, so if the software, for instance, has several algorithms for different markers and different purposes, this is critical because if those apply for a device, the device falls as a consequence into more than one class, and this leads to the situation that the highest class must be regarded for this product. And the same is true if several classification rules apply to the same device. Always the highest classification rule shall apply. You see, this makes it critical as far as the software product is so to say your one solution for everything. If we have a quick classification walkthrough, we see that Rule 1 provides us our products with high risk, life-threatening and infectious diseases, which fall directly under Class D. Rule 2 are the products for transfusion and transplantation, which are dependent on whether they are a listed marker, a critical marker, which the critical markers fall under Class D, whereas the not mentioned markers do fall under Class C. And Rule 3 is, so to say, a summary of several individual risks, like infectious pathogens that do not spread that much into the population, cancer, companion diagnostics, genetic tests, prenatal and neonatal screening, and several other individual risk factors. Rule 4 is per se the other devices for self-testing. So the question is just whether those self-tests are listed, because it provides a list. For instance, blood glucose measuring, cholesterol measuring are listed and therefore are the established tests which fall under Class B. All other self-tests are falling into Class C. And then we have Rule 5, which is, so to say, the generic rule, and Rule 6 with the fallback rule that so to say puts everything into Class B, which is not classified beforehand, and the controls without a quantitative or qualitative assigned value fall as well under Class B. And now for software again, the medical device coordination group gives us a few examples, like software that is driving or influencing another instrument shall fall in the same class as the instrument, whereas and here in the second example they show a product which is driving or influencing another product from a remote location, which is where the same is true. It falls under the same class as the product that is driven or influenced. However, a medical device software that integrates genotypes of multiple genes to predict risk for a disease is classified independently. And these two examples I'd like to show you now in these slides. In the case that you have a reader which is driven or influenced from a remote location, for instance, for run planning, plate layout, for start and stop of the machine, this is surely a, if the reader is a Class A, then software system is as well class A. However, there can be maybe a liquid handling robot be involved here, and then the question is, what is with this handling robot? If that's a very generic device that doesn't have a in vitro diagnostic purpose, it doesn't necessarily need to be an IVD. But if that is the case, it would maybe fall under class A as well, and then the software which drives and influences this liquid handling robot would then be as well a class A product. It would be different for independent software. If you imagine a genomic sequencer that provides data, raw data to a bioinformatics pipeline that calculates a risk score and sends out this risk score for a reporting, where the reporting may do something to interpret the result, we have a totally different situation. There, a liquid handling robot can as well be associated. However, the crucial part is the bio-IT software, which is certainly, as it does genetic information, classified as a gene test in class C, or if it detects pathogens who are life-threatening and spread, it could even fall under class D. But what is with the reporting? If it just provides the risk score and communicates that to the report, I mean, it could fall under communication. However, it is much more reasonable that the reporting part would as well be part of the whole software system, and would fall under the same class as the pipeline itself, or can even be a higher class because it does the interpretation, if the risk score is rather a generic part. So there it is pretty complex, and the guidance does not help yet to answer these questions. Yeah, that is, so to say, that was the part of qualification and classification. I'm very often asked questions. These questions are, for instance, how can I separate software products to fall in the lowest possible risk class? So my answer is clearly segregate your product and specify the intended use precisely, and then it's possible to have parts of the software system that are class A, a generic device, and the others fall, dependent on the clinical claim, into the respective classes B, C, and D, dependent on the criticality. And then what I'm very often asked is, how can legacy software be documented? In this case, you can just do reverse engineering. If I have time enough, I can show you how this works. And what standards need to be considered, that's clear. That's the same discussion as we had before, whether these standards are harmonized or not, or which are state of the art. It's clear that the IEC 62304, the ISO 14971, and 62366 need to be regarded for software for sure. And yeah, the last question I would like to raise here is, how can I prepare for compliance monitored by notified bodies? I mean, in this case, it is clear that you should demonstrate compliance by the QM processes and create the records as you have specified in your QM processes, and you need to make sure that these QM processes are according to the latest standards, or the standards which are regarded as state of the art. So just look at the time I have. Could I have a hint how much time I do have left?
I think no worries, no, Sebastian. We have time for questions. Just go on, I think.
Okay. I can go into details for those FAQs. For instance, this is the most severe one. How can I separate or combine software products to fall in the lowest possible risk class? And there it's necessary to have a segregation strategy. So I give you a four-step protocol to how to segregate. So first of all, collect relevant information. Take the intended use, if not write one, if you don't have one. You look at into your promotional material and your website, what your claims are already, and then analyze your software system and look at the dependencies and the multiple intended uses. if there are dependencies and multiple intended uses, there is certainly a chance to get into lower classes, at least for parts of the software system. Then segregate your product and specify it precisely with the intended use for each part of the software, and then qualify and classify your software product or products and systems again. How can we do that? So, for instance, you have the software system is running on a hardware and an operating system, which is called the runtime environment, and your software is in general a medical device with several intended uses, which is indicated with these two parts here. And after segregation, you may have a generic software system and modules that you install onto the software system, and then the runtime environment changes, and you have split your software into a generic software part and a medical device module, and maybe a second or a third or even more modules. And this allows you to classify each module individually. So before segregation, you have one product covering multiple IVD medical purposes, and then the highest class dependent on one single is dependent on one single purpose. It falls under the highest class dependent on the most critical purpose, and then all software components are subject to audits by the notified body. And after segregation, you have multiple products with one IVD purpose each, and then the classification would fit to the inherent risks for patients dependent on the clinical claims of that module. And there you would have fewer components which are subject to respective audits and approval by notified bodies on the side of the technical documentation. So with the next question was, how can I document legacy software using reverse engineering? In this case, I would use the requirements of the IEC 62304 and the respective V model, and go from your system validation that you have hopefully done for your product already, and from that derive your stakeholder requirements, and hopefully you have done for your software system tests, and from those system tests you can derive software requirement specifications back. And most of the software systems will end up there because you won't find integration tests and unit tests. If we find that, you will certainly already have sort of a compliance to IEC 62304. However, if you're there, you can go this way in the normal way. So this would then not be, again, reverse engineering, so you should simply engineer your software. I would do the reverse engineering based on the documentation model. And how to do that, you can use traceability matrices to see whether you have tests that are already referring to a requirement. And if you miss those crosses here, you will certainly have to do something in the case of reverse engineering. So you can go from validation, acceptance criteria back to stakeholder requirements, from system tests back to software requirement specifications. From integration tests, you can derive your component description and the requirements of your architecture. And from unit tests can be used to have design, so to say, the detailed design and the respective requirements. So I have two more open questions, but I don't want to stress your time too much. Michael, could you give me a hint again whether
your time would actually be over, but I think
Perfect.
This is an interesting topic. So if you want to go on to finish the FAQs,
2 more minutes.
Sure.
All right. So the question 3 is, which standard shall be applied for IVD software? And in this case, we look into the IVDR general performance requirements. And there you see in the chapter 16.2, for devices that incorporate software or software that are devices in themselves, which is meaning standalone software, the software shall be developed and manufactured in accordance with the state of the art, taking into account the principle of development life cycle, which means IEC 62304 compliance, risk management for sure, ISO 14971. Information security is pretty critical because we don't have a dedicated standard for that. Therefore, we have created a guidance on IT security for medical devices, which is applicable for IVDs as well. Verification is for software surely done under IEC 62304, but be careful with validation. This is the already mentioned standard ISO 20916. Don't make the fault to go to IEC 82304. IVDs must always be validated with clinical data, and therefore I recommend to use 20916. So how can I demonstrate compliance to harmonized standard? In this case, as you've heard, the harmonization request was rejected, so therefore state-of-the-art standards. In this case, we use models to display how to work in iterative incremental cycles, so to make standards really applicable in usual life of a developer. So we try to give processes and models that allow the applicability of ISO 13485, for instance, with using iterative incremental cycles. And the same is true for particular software development under IEC 62304. We use the model of the IEC 62304 in the V model as a documentation model, which is static. However, so these parts are then the verification and the validation, but I'd like to show you how we are providing a way how to use agile Scrum methodology to be used in compliance with IEC 62304, as such that we use the respective terms of the standard and the respective activities and put it into the agile development, so that you have partially in 30 days sprints a potentially shippable software solution, which is for sure not shipped because it doesn't have the conformity, but incrementing cycles will lead to the final software that can be CE marked as soon as you have passed your design reviews in the end. So this is a way how this can be achieved. Yeah. So just give you a few risk factors for software. So if software development is not state of the art, this is very crucial. Risk management does not regard software risks. This is very critical. No adequate software architecture available is for sure a major deviation to IEC 62304. And if you don't have a qualification of your personnel that is sufficient, you will certainly get stuck in showing compliance. And usability for software is insufficient, is very much a problem. And if you hesitate to implement IVDR compliance measures, that is what Michael already pointed out very much. This is one of the most crucial risk factors. So I'm at the end of my talk. If you need more help, contact us, and thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. So I think there's one short question. What and when was the very first IVD software launched that was read directly on your smartphone?
When was the time when an IVD software that was read directly on the smartphone? So I know at least customers who have done that, who are doing that since 2 years.
Okay.
I mean, there is in the field of blood sugar monitoring, diabetes, devices out that provide reading facilities over smartphones. But again, there the software, it's just an indicator, it's just showing the values. It's doing nothing else, because
that
otherwise
is just communication. Yeah, that's right.
It's just communication, because otherwise this ends up in a regulatory nightmare.
For sure. So therefore, I'm very thankful that we have this MDCG guidance, which provides or which combines intended use with functionalities. So if you go into IVDR, you only see the intended uses relevant, and for sure there are several software systems that are that have, so to say, the purpose, the IVD purpose. However, it just does something like simple search or archiving or communication, especially those KISS and LIST systems have such functionalities. However, they do have as well medical functions like a calculation of a risk factor. And this makes it complex because if only a very small part of the software system has a medical device and it's not separatable, if you cannot separate this part as a module, then the whole system will become an IVD under IVDR and will fall into that respective high class. That is the very critical point here.
So I fully agree with Sebastian. What is very important in early phases of development projects in medical device software in general, and specifically IVD software, is to the architecture of the whole system. I'm specifically not speaking about software architecture alone. The whole system, the architecture of how you want to set up your system, you need to be very careful. Often the best technical solution ends up in a regulatory nightmare. So sometimes it's better to make it technically a little bit more complex, but to have certain calculation and processes done on a device which already is under a deep scrutiny, in order to avoid to have other elements that that end up to be under deep scrutiny, especially cloud solutions, artificial intelligence. Be careful where you place these kind of calculations or these kind of processes. Where are they run, in order to avoid to have several components that that are of very high risk.
That is certainly true. However, I do think that those IVD manufacturers who are developing new products are certainly aware of that situation and know the IEC 62304 and know the discussion about modules and software systems. However, the big problem is that software under IVDD was only regarded under MedDev 261, where you had the opportunity to find software parts that have a medical purpose and can be combined, because all falls under other IVD, as you pointed out in your talk, that 80% fall under Annex 3 other IVD without notified body involvement, and therefore they were able under IVDD to put all into one software system. And now we have those legacy systems and we need to transfer them into IVDR. And that's not an easy task, because you need to separate your software and you may rewrite the code to allow the respective segregation in the architecture, which is pretty complex. Yeah.
Fully agree. So what we often see is startup companies from universities that come up with technically really good solutions, and then you as a consultant, you need to tell them, guys, be careful if you do it like this. I mean, technically this is nice and it's fully integrating all functions of your mobile phone, and you also have learning algorithms, but these are things then that turn quickly out to make the whole phone a medical device. And then it starts to get quite complicated, because without support of Apple or without support of Samsung, you will have a problem.
Yeah, sure, but the whole I cannot recommend making the whole smartphone a medical device. I would rather say the smartphone and its operating system are the runtime environment for at least a part of the software system. So therefore you can get rid of that. However, the combinations need to be validated, so you need to make sure that it works on a respective Android phone and on an Apple device, iOS device, it's easier to go straight forward with iOS. However, if you would really like to have a clinical utility, then you need to go for Android as well, because a very vast majority of the users will certainly have Android phones. So there's no way around it. There may be smart software solutions that have simulation tools to simulate, so to say, the operating system. However, it's not possible to undergo this.
I think an important aspect here also is the continuous learning, artificial intelligence, which is a major subject, and there also in the software development process of a company, I mean, the management of the releases and how to avoid that those systems learn themselves without passing by a release is yeah, I think that's a big question to solve in the near future.
Very critical. So I would never ever at the moment recommend to have a continuous learning system in a routine diagnostic software. So it can be used for development if you have your tools under control. So the buzzword is computerized system validation for all of your tools that you're using in artificial intelligence. So and validate your input data, validate your so to say your algorithm, how to what is the goal. If you feed your continuous learning system with the wrong data, you will get not the intended algorithm. So the algorithm needs always to be validated, and only a validated algorithm can be placed into a final device. And I mean, all those changes are substantial changes, which will certainly need to be communicated to the notified body and need to be re-reviewed before release into the next version. So that is very critical.
Thank you.